Welcome to the Stowe Conservation Trust 2022 annual meeting. My name is Bob Wilbur. I'm the president of the Stowe Conservation Trust. And I would like each of the directors, if you would, I'm sorry if I'm interrupting your snacks, but if you could stand up and we'll just go around the room and say your name and where you live. And maybe start with Alan. Alan, do you mind starting it? Your name and where you live. Address?
284 Red Acre Road.
Tom Porche, Red Acre Road.
And Dick Perkins, Red Acre Road.
I'm John San Germano, and I'm in the other precinct, and on Taylor Road.
Cliff Smith, West Acton Road.
Eve Downey, West Acton Road.
Jeff Riverson on Wedgewood Road.
Janet Custom-Moffett down the street on Harvard.
Bill Werner, I'm in precinct 1 on Wheeler Road.
Great. Thank you for that. It's a very hard-working group, all volunteer, local land trusts. There are about 120 land trusts in Massachusetts that are local, all volunteer land trusts. The Stowe Conservation Trust was started in 1977, as our new banner says there. And I want to start this meeting with a really important acknowledgement. And that is to acknowledge and remember Don Rising. Don Rising was one of the co-founders of this organization 45 years ago and donated massive amounts of his time and resources to the trust and to the impact of the trust over those 45 years. Just think for a moment when 1977 was. It was a while ago, and so let's pause together just for a moment here and just remember Don Rising. Okay, thank you. So what we're going to do, just to describe the program in advance, and the reason, I know you're a very social group. And I hate to pull you apart, I really do, especially on a nice Saturday. But I need to stay on schedule so that when our presenter comes, she can come into the room and be ready to present. That was the deal that we struck. And so I do want to stay on schedule. And we do have a number of things that we want to talk about. So let's get right into it. And this is, we're going to do a year in review, and then we'll go into the business portion of the meeting, where we will do a number of required actions, elections and treasurer's report and approval of minutes for the annual meeting last year. And then we'll go into our presentation. So we're going to try to keep it moving and informative. And so first, just to acknowledge the importance of our land stewardship work. And that is spearheaded by a number of the directors, John San Germano and Bill Werner and Tom Porche in particular. There are certainly others, but they're really the backbone of our stewardship efforts. Stewardship has never been more important than it is today, and that's for a number of different reasons. Invasive plants represent a huge threat to conserved lands, and as I often say, those conserved lands that don't receive regular and continuous attention are going to be degraded significantly over time. So that's why the investment of time that we put into caring for the Stowe Conservation Trust lands is so important. there's also a very real climate change connection as well, because those invasive plants are what are known as stressors in climate lingo. And so helping nature fare better as climate conditions continue to change, helping them be more resilient to the impacts of climate change. That's the importance of stewardship, whether it's removing invasive wetland plants or providing access through boardwalks. That work is hugely, hugely important. And it's often done quietly. You don't see it necessarily because it's off in the woods. It's underappreciated. And I really want to shine a light on it and just thank the three people that I mentioned, the three directors, and thank, by extension, those of you who give your time as part of the stew crew. It's essential work, so thank you very much for putting in the time on that activity. Let's talk about land protection. We've got some good things to talk about in land protection from the last year. This is technically not in the last year, but I know at the last annual meeting, I didn't shine as bright a light on this as I could have. And this is the conservation restriction on 6.5 acres of beautiful land on Harvard Road that Nancy Shepard put in place. So let's give a hand for Nancy and thank her for that.
Mentioned that about 3 weeks ago, the 8th of October, whenever that was, one of my grandsons got married right out in that snowy field, only it wasn't snowy, it was a beautiful day.
As it should be.
Yeah.
That's
And
fantastic.
Tom and I had our 50th wedding anniversary some years before that, so.
Great.
That was a party.
And so another big outcome was the Halleck Point project. And this one, I really love this project in so many ways. And let me just cut right to it because I don't want to forget to say this. If you haven't been there since it's been acquired and sort of prepared for public visitation, you should go check it out. There are picnic tables at the end of the point. There's a trail system in place now. There's a trail kiosk. Really wonderful outcome. And so you can see by this map here, this really shows why acquiring or conserving Halleck Point was so important. It's such one of these last chance opportunities that we have at this period in time. We're seeing a lot, we get to be the ones that have the last chances to do certain things. That doesn't mean as a community we always will do the right thing, but Stowe is a very green community, very green citizens, and if presented with a well-conceived project, they tend to support it. And Halleck Point is no different. So Halleck Point is shown in red, and what we're looking at is the Assabet River National Wildlife Refuge in blue, and various state forest land abutting. And more than anything, the importance of Halleck Point, this is what it would have become. It was a fully approved subdivision for 7 homes, as I remember correctly. There's nothing wrong with residences, homes, except in an instance like this, where it was the last chance to acquire a sizable property fronting on Lake Boone. Lake Boone is one of the defining elements of Stowe. Not all of us are lucky enough to live at Lake Boone. So now we have a place where every resident of Stowe and beyond could go and visit and experience the lake firsthand. And that's a really, really special thing. There's some more context with the refuge and the state forest. This is the plan that is now in place. It was once the vision for the property. This was what was presented to town meeting. And so a trail system within this property, but also connecting to the trail systems in the refuge and the state forest as well. And right at the end of Halleck Point Road is where the parking lot is for the Marlboro State Forest. That's just pure luck that that parking lot was there and that we can take advantage of that as part of a really extensive trail network now. So those who are hiking a trail in the wildlife refuge can now think about ending up at Lake Boone and maybe having a picnic lunch on one of the picnic tables at the point, and then continue on their long-distance trail jaunt. So it's a really special one. It was in a particularly ecologically significant part of the lake. It included a lot of unbroken road frontage. So if you picture, for instance, South Acton Road, where you come in from Acton, you are immediately, you notice this is really different. This is woods and nature and intact forest, and it lets one know that they've entered into a different town. And we're very proud of the fact that Stowe is as green as it is. So this is one of the other entrances to Stowe from Hudson along that Sudbury Road frontage. And so that was another important aspect of it. There's the parking lot at the Marlboro State Forest that I mentioned. And that's where what we're looking at right there, that is at the point. And there are now 2 or 3 picnic tables there. Like I said, a really wonderful experience to go out there and have a picnic. The financing for this one was important, and it was challenging because, frankly, we knew that the Stowe Acres project was queuing up very quickly behind this. And we knew that Community Preservation Act funds, CPA funds, would need to be a big part of the Stowe Acres outcome. So we had to find a way to do Halleck Point without a big draw on CPA funds. And so, as you see here, with the ask for CPA, it was $1 million right of first refusal through Chapter 61. That, under Chapter 61, it's a 120-day clock that starts. And most of you have been through that roller coaster ride, and that is a very, very difficult thing to do in 120 days. We, as a community, really lucked out because the governor had issued a special edict under the COVID pandemic to basically extend the 120 days significantly. And that gave us the time to conceive of doing this correctly, especially having a large private fundraising component. And so the Stowe Conservation Trust partnered with the Lake Boone Association, really nice partnership there, and successfully raised $168,000 for the private piece of it. The request to CPA was for $400,000, and the plan was to sell 2 lots as part of that for revenue of $500,000 to put towards the purchase price. Good news is the real estate market went crazy during this project. And so when we sold those 2 lots, what some people thought was an aggressive figure of $500,000 for both of them, we got $630,000 for the 2 of them. And so what that allowed us to do is reduce the request to CPA by a further amount. So in the end, there was less than $300,000 of CPA money into this project. And that $1 million property that the town acquired was then worth, because it had appreciated so much, if 2 lots were worth $630,000, and it was 7 lots in total, it was worth easily over $2 million by the time we purchased it. So it was really a good value, as well as being one of the last chance opportunities. But I want to thank those of you who contributed towards that effort very, very much. Really appreciated that. That was a long campaign, and I just want to thank all of you for your support on that one. And because of those efforts, our collective efforts, instead of looking like that, it will always look like that. And that's a good thing. And I think we can probably all agree on that. So that was, sure. So instead of looking like that, it looks like that, yeah. Lisa's my neighbor, by the way. Thanks, Lisa. All right, so next one is the Stowe Acres project, which, we should all, really, every citizen of Stowe should be really proud of this project, because it is starting to get the recognition that it deserves. It is a really absolutely spectacular project. And so just looking at it here, 100-year-old golf course, 2 18-hole courses, the north course and the south course. On the north, it's bounded by the Elizabeth Brook, on the south by the Assabet River. Very important piece. There you see just how much of the land area of Stowe is occupied by Stowe Acres. Hugely important. But this next image, I think, really puts it in context. This next image shows existing open space in light green. And we've known for a while that the southwest corner, was underserved by open space. And so when Stowe Acres elevated as a potential project, it only increased the priority of it, because this was a golden opportunity to really address the inequity of supply of open space for that part of town. It's important for every resident of the town to have good access to protected open space nearby. Stowe is, as we all know, Stowe's really known primarily for two things. One of them being golf, the other being fruit, apples especially. But golf is a big part of our community, and Stowe Acres has a special history, and I'm not going to go into it very much because our speaker is going to be presenting on that tonight, so I don't want to steal any of her thunder, except that it is a history of that south course that very few of us knew, and it's part of what makes this very special. So here's a cool point, potentially. I think the Stowe Acres project was the very first project that Stowe has done with community preservation funds that included very compelling outcomes for all 4 allowable expenditures under CPA. Open space protection, provision of additional active recreation land, provision of additional affordable housing, and historic preservation. They're all there, and it's part of what makes it a really, really special property. So, so the one thing that the trust does not want to get lost in the mix is that we played a really important role in this. A lot of it was behind the scenes, but the first thing that we did is to suggest to the town officials that we could approach the owner. We were hearing rumors that the property was about to be sold to a national home builder to build a mega development. And the idea that we had was to use some of the trust's funds to hire a very creative planner to work with the owner and a prospective developer, town officials, and the trust to conceive of an integrated plan that would include those different components of housing, open space, and recreation, and historic preservation, in a way that none of us would have come up with by working on our own. And that's exactly what played out. It just worked beautifully. And so what we're looking at here is what would have happened if we did nothing. This was what was about to happen, because we did confirm it. It was about to be sold to a large national home builder who was going to purchase the entire property, 328 acres. What I've heard is the largest undeveloped, unprotected land inside of 495, and would have built by right zoning, and that would have looked like this. It would have been roughly 2-acre lots, very large homes, and would have consumed the entire course. With using our open space development bylaw, you get a little bit of a better outcome. It says here that 60% of the land is preserved as open land. That looks a little generous to me, but even this outcome, better than worst case, but still not that great, and really a missed opportunity more than anything else. And so we knew that we really didn't want to see the McMansions that we've had built in Stowe for the last several decades. We also knew that we didn't want a traditional 40B development. And just so that everybody is together here, when I say 40B, what I'm talking about there is in Massachusetts, for towns that have less than 10% of affordable housing in their community, a prospective developer can come in and build some affordable housing, and in the process can override local zoning. And one can end up with some very undesirable outcomes that way because it overrides local zoning. And so, and the developer never builds more than the required 25% of affordable units under those scenarios. So we worked through that planning process, and we essentially used that same provision, the affordable housing 40B, but used it proactively as a community. It essentially became a town-sponsored 40B. It was exactly the type of housing that we that we needed most. And so these are some of the concepts here of what is going to be built there. Very large focus on affordability, different types of affordability. That's an important thing. Starting with 25 units of rentals, and that's for the people that are, it's affordable at those at 50% of median income level. That's way beyond what the usual affordable housing is, and there is a need for that in our community, so we're really, really pleased to be able to see that. And several other sizable components of affordable housing. Some people have wondered, why would this land trust be excited about the housing? Well, it's because we are part of the community, and we know that the affordable housing is needed by our community to remain diverse and maybe become more diverse. Just as important, that planner that I described came up with a very innovative approach that allowed this number of units to be built on a very small fraction of the footprint that would have been consumed previously. So smaller, more energy efficient houses on much, much smaller lots. So less land consumptive development model. And so that's why we're so excited about it. In the end, the south course was protected through the purchase of a permanent conservation restriction, and that will be co-held by the town. That is co-held by the town and the Stowe Conservation Trust. And then on the north course, everything but the housing pod. The housing pod is going to go in that tan area there. All of those units are going to go in that small footprint there. And the rest of the north course will be purchased by the town for active recreation and for conservation and restoration, ecological restoration. And the Stowe Conservation Trust will hold a conservation restriction on that north course as well. This is going to be a very trail-oriented outcome. This should be really very special. This should be just absolutely spectacular. So in total, upwards of 85% of the land is kept as open land. We're actually building more houses there than would have been possible under as of right zoning, and big focus on affordable units. And so, as I said, it's really going to be a very trail-oriented place, and really should be super. This is the view on the southern end of the south course, looking at the Assabet River. And then I mentioned ecological restoration a moment ago. So if you can follow this, what we're looking at on the right-hand side, on the left-hand side, outlined in sort of dashed red, is the former location of the driving range for the golf course. And the photos that you see on the right-hand side, the top one being the best one, is that same driving range at certain times of the year. You can tell it wants to be a wetland, and in fact, it was a wetland, and it will be a wetland again. And so that through ecological restoration, that will be returned to a functioning wetland. There'll be additional restoration opportunities up along the Elizabeth Brook and Wheeler Pond that are very exciting as well. And that restoration piece of it was a big part of the excitement by state government to recently grant a $1.1 million grant to the town of Stowe for that project. For active recreation, it really opens up some incredible potential for our community, including an entire recreation facility with things like a swimming pool potentially. So this really could be very nice. And the type of housing and the income diversity that it will foster will really be a good thing for our community. No doubt about that at all. I just learned that this project actually, Peter Flinker, who was the planner that we had hired, he's nominated this project for an award from the American Planning Association, and it's going to be featured at the Mass Land Conservation Conference. Big focus on this project, and because we know in Massachusetts that there absolutely is a housing crisis that needs to be addressed. Simultaneously, there is a climate response land conservation crisis that also needs to be addressed. We can't do them in sequence, they have to be addressed simultaneously. And so showing examples of where the two can be interwoven is a really good thing. So that's the Stowe Acres project. And we're about to go into the business meeting, but maybe I'll just pause for a second and say, did anyone have any questions before we move on with other parts of the program?
Alan, did you want to say anything about the energy efficiency of these houses?
Yeah, so the question was, do we want to say anything about the energy efficiency? And they are smaller units, so by default, they will be more energy efficient than what would have been built there. That said, I was going to say pushing, but it's bordering on pushing. It's certainly strongly encouraging the developer to incorporate energy efficiency as much as he can. We are trying to make the point, and I think it's a valid point, that they will be more marketable the more energy efficient they are, because it'll be lower operating costs for the occupants. And we're at as you know, and I know you know this better than I do, but we're at a really important juncture as a society. And state government is about to overhaul building regulations and to require buildings, especially new construction, to be much more energy efficient. And it looks like those two things will come together in this project. It's not set yet, so I can't say more than that, but he's getting encouragement. He, the prospective developer, Mark O'Hagan, is getting encouragement from a lot of different angles, including the state housing agencies, to make these very efficient and incorporate alternative energy and so on. Nancy?
Yeah, will there be some sort of a map that shows where the trails are and what, and when will that be available? I mean, will it be a while before? And also, I should have asked this sooner, can you speak a little closer to the mic?
Yes. Sorry about that. I should have adjusted this a little bit more before I started, but I will try. I'll try to be more conscious of that. And so your first question, there will be maps and good signage for the trail system there. It will play out over time. The south course will continue in golf. It is permanently protected through a conservation restriction, but during the negotiations, we did negotiate a trail easement across the south course to the Assabet River. So there will be an altogether new public access trail on the south course. And this is a bit of an editorial comment, but I would love to see interpretive panels along that trail that would help interpret some of the history of that our speaker will talk about. And then on the north course, part of the negotiating approach that we used and that was acceptable to the owner was to have them continue golf on the north course for a period of up to 10 years. And at that reduced the purchase price significantly by making that concession. And but that's where most of the trails will be. I've been told by the owner that he is open to having trails constructed where possible sooner than that. And so I think we will be pursuing that. Ultimately, there will be a really robust trail network on both portions of it with great signage, and it really should be very, really kind of unlike anything we have, actually.
Will people be able to take dogs on the trails?
I don't think any of that's been sorted out yet, and it's always a good question. Lisa?
Do you know what the time frame is for building these homes?
So they are the question was, what's the time frame for building the homes? And I do know, we had a team meeting last Wednesday, and the water system has been approved, the wastewater disposal system has been approved. It's a packaged treatment plant as opposed to individual septic systems. And so they are just about to formally introduce the project for review by the Zoning Board of Appeals. How long that will take is sort of anybody's guess. I have to believe the ZBA, Zoning Board of Appeals, is aware of how popular this project is locally. When the vote occurred at town meeting, after all that work, I was on pins and needles, and the vote was something like 276 to 6. And I almost fell off my chair. I couldn't believe it. I literally could not believe it. And it just showed what a great community we have, and that people got it. People understood that these things were really, really important. And that a project that brings so many community benefits forward was worth supporting. So I hope that the Zoning Board of Appeals understands that as a backdrop and can, do their good due diligence in proper review of the project. But I hope it comes out the other end of, the approval end of it, looking very much like what is being proposed here. And I'd say that's likely to be the case, based on what I know. Was there one more sorry?
On a different subject, driving along South Acton Road, I can just catch a little sign that says something like opening after Thanksgiving. Is that a Stowe Conservation Trail or something? I can't figure out what that is, but it's near one of the trails.
Thanks, Tim. So that's the Taproot Christmas Tree Farm.
Sorry.
Well, it's all right. So it's a piece of town land that has been leased out to former town planner Jesse Stedman. And he grew up growing Christmas trees. His parents are in that business. And so that's the Christmas tree farm that he put in place there. And all kidding aside, I would urge any of you who celebrate Christmas to go check out the trees there. I got a spectacular tree there last year, and it was fun, so. Any others? Okay. I think we'll keep moving then. We're going to go into the business portion of the meeting. And so maybe I'd ask Alan. Alan is usually somebody who can help ground me on this type of thing. Do we have to actually take a vote to go into the official business portion?
I don't think so. We've never done it before.
Okay, thank you. All right, I just want to make sure I didn't skip over that if that was a key part that would be fatal later. And so what we have here are the minutes from last year's annual meeting. And thank you, Jeff Ritterson, clerk of the trust. And so I don't know, for those who haven't had a chance to read these in advance, maybe I'll give you just a little bit of time to do that. Do we have a motion to adopt the minutes from last year's annual meeting?
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Any edits to this for those who were there? Hearing none. All in favor? Aye? Okay. Any opposed? Abstentions? Looks like it was unanimous. All right. And so then next we have our treasurer's report and our stellar treasurer, Eve Donahue.
Thanks. Sorry, it looks like some of the titles got cut off, but I can talk you through it. Yeah, that's all right. My name is Eve Donahue. I'm the treasurer of the Stowe Conservation Trust. I'm going to take you briefly through the trust's financial picture for the year ending August of 2022. And you can see on the top there are two pie charts. The one on the left represents our income for the year, and the one on the right represents our expenses. And on the bottom is a table that gives a little bit more information about our income and expenses, both for this year, which is in the first column, and then for the prior 2 years, which are in the next 2 columns, just for reference. So going back to the pie charts, you can see that the income pie chart is bigger than the expense pie chart, reflecting the fact that our income was higher than our expenses this year. always nice to see. About half of our income came in the form of restricted donations and grants. And all that means is that it came in to support particular projects that we're running and programs. And in this case, all of that money, which you can see down below is about $30,000, came in for Stowe Acres. So thank you for those of you who are supporting the Stowe Acres project through us this year. Another 36%, the percentages are cut off on the pie charts, I'm sorry about that, but it's 36% came from membership dues. And that's from the people in this room and others who couldn't join us here today. And we know that those of you in this room, most of you, if not all of you, support us year after year after year. And that continuous support is so much appreciated. And we know it's because you support our mission, and we literally could not fulfill our mission without you. So thank you very much. One more thing I want to talk about on income before I go to expenses is we run some fundraisers during the year, including our Bike for the Woods, which happens in August every year and has been run for years with lots of skill by Chris Spear. And those of you who know Chris know that he and his wife Laura have decamped to Providence. So he will no longer be running our Bike for the Woods for us, and we're very sorry about that, but we hope to soldier on without him, so look for that next year. So that's income. Expenses, about half of our expenses were for land deals, and you can see down there that's about $23,000, and all of that was for Halleck Point. So we did all of our fundraising for Halleck Point last year, and so that's what I showed last year, but we didn't write the check until this year, and that's pretty common. You know, you fundraise first, and then you write the check, and all your money goes out the door. So in this year, our money went out the door for Halleck Point. The second biggest expense is program expenses, by which I just mean mission-related expenses that are not directly related to land deals. And in this case, all of that $12,617 was for stewardship. And Bob mentioned this already, but I want to just reiterate the fact that stewardship is very important to our mission. When we acquire a piece of property or a conservation restriction, what we're acquiring is a set of responsibilities, right? We are responsible for making sure that the conservation values on that land are fulfilled forever. As Bob likes to say, we're in the forever business. And we take that very seriously. So in this case, we spent a lot of money on stewardship. A lot of that was for survey boundaries, making sure that we understand with our neighbors where that boundary is so that there's no misunderstanding there. And then we also had some boardwalk expenses and so forth. So those are the highlights, and you can see that we had total income of $64,000, total expenses of $42,000, so we ended the year up $22,000. And so that's a brief overview, and I'm happy to answer questions either now or you can catch me afterwards.
Thanks very much, Eve. As usual, excellent report. We are treated to the best treasurer's reports each and every board meeting. Truth, absolute truth. And Eve's comments reminded me, actually, one thing that I forgot to say, which is when I was talking about Stowe Acres at the end of it, the trust has committed to raising $100,000 towards Stowe Acres. And $75,000 of that funding will go towards the purchase price, and that is, I'm now told that's likely to happen in January, either late December or January, and so the trust will need to come up with a check for $100,000, $75,000 towards purchase price, and $25,000 towards associated costs, things like appraisal and survey and so on, things that are associated with that transaction. That'll be the purchase of the North Course. And so we are roughly at about $40,000, And so if any of you or anyone you might know who might want to support that stellar outcome that we just talked about there, we still need to raise significant amount of money. And anybody who can help with that, it would be greatly appreciated. All right, so next we have, I believe we're going to do the bylaw changes next, and then we have elections, and then we'll go to the program.
All right, so now we come to the really fun part of the meeting. I'm going to take my mask off here. First, I just wanted to say a couple things. You know, we listened to Bob, and then we listened to Eve, and you know how professional they are in everything they say and do. I just want to remind everybody that this board of directors we're all volunteers. There is no staff for this organization. We do it all, and people put in dozens and hundreds of hours when you count the Stu Crew leadership team. And unfortunately, that seems to make us a little bit deceptive. Nobody realizes that we are actually a corporation. We are a nonprofit corporation. And here's a little law lesson for those of you who aren't lawyers. Listen carefully, you can take notes, the test will be following. There are two critical documents that every nonprofit corporation in Massachusetts has. When you register with the state, there is a document called the Articles of Organization. And we have that document that was created back in 1977. And it was signed by 3 incorporators, Dick Perkins, Eric Sonicson, and one more. No, it wasn't Don. I think it was Leonard Johnson. Another Red Acre Road. So that document has been there. You are allowed to amend that document from time to time. It contains the basic structure of your nonprofit corporation. The second document that all nonprofits have is a set of bylaws. Those are created by the board of directors of the organization, and we can change those from time to time, and we have. You may have remembered prior annual meetings where we've come to you with changes to the bylaws. Well, this year, one of the things that we were looking at, Eve just told you about how important fundraising is from our own members and how much money we raise from members through their dues. Those of you who get the little notices from us may remember or realize that we have a series of categories of membership. And this year we looked at that and we want to make some changes in that. That's why I'm here right now to go over this with you. So we decided we'd do that, and you all received a document, I think, what I call the notice of the annual meeting. Do you remember getting this emailed to you? It outlines the 2 changes we wanted to make in the membership categories. And I'm going to go over this in a minute, but we started to change the bylaws in order to do this, but then we realized that these categories were also written into the Articles of Organization. And we couldn't change the bylaws, at least we couldn't do that first, until we changed the Articles of Organization. So we're here today to make 2 changes. They're identical changes, but they're to the Articles of Organization and then to the bylaws. So I'm just going to quick review what we're trying to do. The motion on the screen is going to be for the articles, but I can summarize that for you because it's right on that notice that you received. It's to the first one is member category name change from patron to sponsor. The existing Articles of Organization and bylaws confer an exemption of annual dues on patrons, but they require that they be appointed by the board of directors. Based on a diligent search of available records and institutional memories of long-standing board members, no evidence was found of any board-appointed patrons. Consequently, after determining that there were none, the name of this membership category is proposed to be changed. Actually, we're eliminating patrons. And we're going to change the category to sponsor to avoid any future confusion, and the only criterion will be a contribution level. As you know, we have different contribution levels for each of these membership categories. So that's one thing we're really trying to just clean up the bylaws and the articles with respect to this patron category for which no one falls in and never will. Secondly, new member categories. The existing articles and bylaws describe 6 categories of members. It is proposed that the categories be expanded to 8, adding contributing and senior student, along with lifetime sponsor, sustaining, contributing, family, individual, senior student, and charter. So only lifetime members shall be exempt from annual dues. That's really all we're trying to do here, is to expand from 6 to 8 the member categories. So these changes have to happen both to the bylaws, but first to the articles, because that is our foundational document, and we need to change that first, and then we can change our bylaws. Okay, got that? Test will be coming. I'm sorry? Well, the benefit of eliminating the patron category is to just clean up the bylaws and the articles, because there is no one in that category, and it makes no sense to continue to send out little notices to you with a patron category. It's not on there. We don't have any. We're expanding it, so we're going to have a larger set of options for members than we have now. We're trying to increase membership dues that we can collect by offering an additional number of categories. So that it's really just that. This is not a thunderous change in anything we are doing as an organization. So I'm not going to read the motion. It's up on the screen. This is the one for the articles. You'll see a second motion that's going to be very similar looking for the bylaws. And at this point, I guess I'm looking for a motion to approve, as it says here, these changes to the Articles of Organization to replace Article 3 in its entirety of the articles. Can I take motion and a second? Do we need to discuss this any further? Is there any discussion? I'm happy to talk about it, but I'm sure you'd rather hear the speaker who's waiting probably. If not, I'm just going to ask all in favor of the motion, raise your hand, say aye. All opposed? I see none. That's great. One thing I didn't mention and won't be on the test is that we needed a 2/3 vote to change the Articles of Incorporation. I want to go to motion 2, which is the bylaws. For that, we only need a majority vote. So I'll give you just a little minute to take a look at that, but very similar. So this is something we can do on our own, change the bylaws, but we do need the majority vote of the members at an annual meeting after we've given you notice of what it was that we were trying to do. With respect to the Articles of Organization, we have some paperwork. I wanted to mention that our Vice Chair, Susan Crane, couldn't be here today. This was really her job. I'm stepping in to do that. But after this meeting, Susan will do this paperwork and submit the article changes to the Secretary of State's office, where it has to go through a review process, and hopefully everything will get approved. But this bylaw change we're doing on our own, and I just want to put in the caveat that it's subject to approval by the Secretary of State of the bylaw change, but I assume that's really going to happen. So can I have a motion to approve motion 2? Second? Okay, any further discussion? If not, all in favor? Great. Any opposed? Jeff, are you taking notes here?
I already wrote it down.
Okay, so,
Hoping for the best.
all right, Jeff's secretary, and we need to record that we voted unanimously on both of these motions. So, thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Alan, very much for that. And next, we have the elections for the trustees. And so, Jeff, could I ask you to come up? Jeff Ritterson, the clerk.
Good evening. Good evening, Jeff Ritterson, serve as clerk for the organization. So along with taking the minutes of the annual meetings and of all our board meetings, part of my duties are to keep track of these elections of directors and officers. And so this year we have 4 directors up for a re-election of a 3-year term. Alan Fierce, who you just heard from, John San Germano, co-leading the Stew Crew, Eve Donahue, who you heard from, and myself, Jeff Ritterson. We also have nominated a new director, Laurie Burnett.
Do we have a motion to renew the existing officers who are up for renewal? Board members. And did we get a second? All right. Any further discussion on that? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Should we abstain if we're one of the candidates? No abstentions. And let me just, so I'm going to the second item now, which is the nomination of Laurie Burnett to fill a vacancy as director. And Laurie is somebody that I've gotten to know. So Laurie, if you don't mind, I'm going to just take 2 sentences or so to just give my version of who you are. We are very lucky to have Laurie be willing to be nominated. She is familiar with the conservation world. Her dad is a very, very active conservationist his entire life, especially the years that he and they lived in Maryland. And I have verified that several different ways in talking to people who work in Maryland. And Laurie is also somebody who is very engaged in a lot of different areas within town, and including social justice. And she's somebody who walks on the trails as much as about anybody that I know. And I think she'll be a terrific addition to the trustees for the Stowe Conservation Trust. So let me, before we consider that nomination, I believe the right thing to do is ask if there are any other nominations from the floor. Hearing none, we will go back to the nomination. Do we have a motion to endorse Laurie Burnett as a new trustee of the Stowe Conservation Trust? So we've got a motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? Everyone in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Terrific. Thank you, Laurie.
So we also have 5 people up for election as officers for a one-year term. Those folks being Bob Wilbur as president, Susan Crane, who's not here tonight, as vice president, Eve Donahue continuing as treasurer, Bill Werner as assistant treasurer, and myself again as clerk.
Do we have a motion to endorse that slate? Okay.
Second.
Any further discussion?
Quick, before they change their mind.
Exactly. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, great. Thanks very much. That concludes the business portion of the meeting. And Jeff, thanks very much for handling that. Both Jeff and Alan stepped in on short notice when Susan was not feeling well. And so really appreciate both of you being willing to do that on short notice. And so now we're going to move to the exciting part of our meeting, which is the presentation. Okay, one very important thing that I neglected to do during the business portion of the meeting was to ask for endorsement of the treasurer's report. And I think it's turned on. And so I think you made a motion.
Yes.
Second. And Bill seconded it. And so all in favor?
There's a treasurer's report.
Endorsing the treasurer's report. Any opposed? Any abstention? Unanimous. Thank you, Eve. Okay.
I'm Marilyn Zavorski from the Stowe Historical Society. Susan Crane asked me if I would do this presentation. In 2015, the Historical Society was contacted by a young WBZ radio sports writer. And he was just out of college, and he was just trying to find something really cool. And he came across Mapledale Golf Course. And he said, can we work together between WBZ and the Historical Society and do a program for Black History Week, or month? And I said, why not? I didn't know very much about it. So he had already started digging in the Boston Globe, and so here we go. So these are some of the resources that I used recently. This book here, Hidden Fairways. I have it in the back, but I was going to set it up. But being a teacher, you always have all your props. So if anyone wants to look at it, I have it. And the sources all mention Mapledale, even if it's just a paragraph. It's absolutely amazing how important this little golf course ended up being in the history of the black golf courses. You have to remember, in 1920, this was the golden age of sports. And that meant the Caucasians were really into it. You had Whalen Park, you had all sorts of things. But the African Americans were not welcome. And because this was the Jim Crow era, and so the blacks were trying to create their own social and cultural centers. And one of the ways to do this was to have their own little golf courses. And this was for everything. They would dances, they would have all sorts of programs, so that they would be able to have more of an equal opportunity compared to what the Caucasians were having. This is John M. Shippen, and I included him because he, even though I'm not going to talk about him today, was very important in Mapledale in getting black players to come. And he was actually the first African-American professional golfer. And that's 1896, which is absolutely incredible. The very first African-American golf course has been credited to Shady Breast Country Club in Westfield, New Jersey. You know, this was a white golf course. It was called Westfield Golf Course. And a group of black entrepreneurs bought it, and they turned it into a black country club. So that was really very interesting compared to Mapledale. And what is really cool about this place is that in the summer, Shady Rest, the golf club, was a part of the National Register of Historic Places. It's something we can think about for Stowe, too. So here we have Mapledale. It's the earliest African-American golf course designed and developed privately on purchased land, which is interesting in the fact that Robert H. Hawkins, it was his dream, his reality, and he wanted to have a golf course. And he started with land. He didn't start with a golf course. He built it. 9 holes, but he got it. And it was known as the United Golfers Incorporated. And the first 3 consecutive national golf tournaments for Negroes were at Mapledale in the United States. And because of this venture, Robert H. Hawkins is known as the father of Negro golf. And that is how it is written. In order to pull this off, because Braden and WBZ Radio was laid off. So here we had all this material. We hadn't talked to Stowe Acres yet. So I just kept right on going. I said, let's see how much I can gather. So it's through newspaper articles, Ancestry.com, the Stowe Town Vault, the South Middlesex Registry of Deeds, and many published books, magazines, and things online. The black culture had their own newspapers, and 2 of the prominent ones is the Pittsburgh Courier and the Chicago Defender. And people around the country would subscribe to these, and they would be mailed to them, and they would know what is happening in the United States and in their area. But then we had the Boston Globe. Son of a gun, we have a Boston paper, August 5th, 1926, and the headline is, Golf Course in Stowe for Colored People, believed to be the only one of its kind. Since 1926, we know that we had Shady Rest, but in 1926, this is what Boston knew. And what is interesting, this is August 5th, but in Baltimore, the Baltimore Afro-American, 2 months earlier, was talking about what was going to happen in Stowe before the Boston Globe even. So they were on it. They were on it. And they mentioned Barbara Hawkins and the other players that were going to be coming. So Mapledale Country Club, the land with buildings was bought and developed in Stowe, February 1926. And majority of these pictures that you're going to see here, these are glass plates that we have in the vault. And it's the reverse image, so it's really interesting to try to print them out. Who was Robert H. Hawkins? Well, Ancestry really quickly find that he was born son of a coachman in 1888. He, from a very young age, would be caddying. Blacks at this time would only be caddies. At the Forest Park Club in Adams, where he was born. He moved to Burlington, Vermont after his mother died, he and his father, and where he attended things for high school. And then he also was caddying at the I could say this a moment ago, Wanakee Club, and this is, whoops, sorry. Yeah, let's see there. here we go. And this is a poor picture. I mean, it's as best you can get it, but that's the club in Burlington, Vermont. After he graduated, he couldn't make any money this way, so he changed over and he became steward of the country club so he could make money so he could live. This is just for a fun little thing. The National Archives, which you get on Ancestry, you can get draft registrations and all that. And so this verifies the information. And he's 29 years old. He owns a bowling alley in Billards. He's his own boss. But the question was, does he have to support anyone? And he said, yes, my father solely, except for his care of 2 lawns. It just, his father was out there mowing lawns, and that wasn't his job, that was his father's. But other than that, he's taking care of his father. I have a bundle of the National Archives, the census, and this is Stowe, and this is 1930. It just shows where he is. He's still saying he owns the golf course. It's worth $10,000, and he and his wife are there. We also, in the vault, have the Stowe tax records. And so I only put his down. I could have put the golf course, but just so you could see the ink has faded a lot. It was a real challenge to take these pictures, and they had to piece them together. But he was paying taxes in Stowe. Another way of finding out people is the Stowe directory, and he is way down here at the bottom, Hawkins, and they have him at the Mapledale Country Club. Looking for a picture. We don't have pictures of people. And you just keep searching and searching. If you have a subscription, you can get historic newspapers from all over the United States. I don't have it. I have Ancestry, but I can't have everything. And I found that it said that there's one in February. You can Google it, and every time it comes up a different page, so you never know. So you have to keep doing it over and over and over, hoping that maybe the page that you want shows up. Son of a gun, there it is. I took a screenshot, and it's about that big, and we kept putting it through Photoshop and playing with it all over and over, and that's the best we got it. So it's pretty darn good. I'm really happy with this, because he is supposed to be a stocky fellow. You can see he is. He's supposed to be a very jovial, happy person. And there's his sweet wife, Edith, and this is in 1952. That doesn't help us about the land. In order to understand the land, you have to go down to the South Middlesex Registry of Deeds, which is a trip in itself. Just parking. And Tom and I parked on the road, and it only took 8 quarters, and so we kept having to go back, and feed it, because it only took so many quarters at a time. The reason why you have to go is because this is in the 20s. Anything 50s below, maybe 60s below, hasn't been indexed, because Middlesex County is the area where all the original documents were. Everyone lived in this area, closer to Boston than here. And it's not indexed. If you were in Worcester County, you could just go right through it and get all of it. So when you go in, you have to go up to the 3rd floor, and we have this. It's really interesting. This side here is the court. This is the registry on the other side. And they have the whole 3rd floor is indexes. And you have to go through it. And I started writing it down. I said, wait a minute. I have a camera with me. I have my phone. And you just took picture after picture after picture of this because you're looking for numbers. If you have the docket of the number and the page, then you can go home and look them up. So it turned out to be very worthwhile, all of that. And this is what we found. There were 25 transactions in less than 4 years. Because what a lot of these people do is they don't use banks. They use their friends, and they're borrowing money. And so when you go through all of these, your head's spinning because they keep, it looks like he's not owning it because he signs it over to his friend because his friend's giving him some mortgage money, back and forth and back and forth. And this was, in 2015, it was Bob Walrath that helped me sort of unravel this. Being an attorney, he understood this, so I had a lot to learn, but it was totally, totally fascinating. I have all these. If anyone wants them, we can get them printed out because they're all in PDFs. This is the very first transaction, February 27th, 1926. He paid $10,000, and it included, this is the Randall farm, livestock, poultry, crops, hay in the barn, furniture, wagons, farming implements, and there's also had been a range, it did not include the range and a machine, and furniture that belonged to Ray L. I can't remember his. Brooks, thank you. I only can see the B in this angle. So he was probably like the caretaker there at that point. And that was February 1926. This is the first article that went with the headline. And it is a fabulous article, but we're not going to read it. We can get it printed out if you want to see it. So I summarized it because it's long. It's too many words. What it said was there 190 acres, 18-room mansion, dancing room, guest rooms, men's locker room in a separate building. There's going to be a 9-hole golf course, which was laid out by Ralph Thomas from Sandy Brook Country Club. That's in Wayland. And the links were going to be extended in the following year. And they're going to have facilities for horseback riding, tennis, trap and gallery shooting, croquet, quoits, and winter sports. And this is an undated picture from the vault. It is not the glass negative. We have no idea. It's an old picture. That's all we can tell you. At the same time, he's being very creative, and he is putting out advertisements that people can come and just use the facilities. They don't have to be golfing. Come. So we have Knights Templars coming out of Boston. And then down here we have the Observatory Hill Businessmen's Association. And this is going to be the second year that they've come, this following year. So he is doing everything he can to get money coming in to this. And then they have the official opening. It was in 2027. And it's fun here that they're dedicating the new dance hall, which is the big building, the big room that they have, but they probably put a new floor in. And I don't know what that all entails. Then they had the tournament, and what was interesting at this one, there were 60 entries, and they came as far as New Orleans and Atlanta, Georgia. Now this is where you have to remember this is the Jim Crow era. And these people are all traveling by car. And there are stories that people in Stowe would see the African Americans arriving in a convoy of, a section of cars. And the more I thought about it, I said, of course. It's for their safety. It's for their safety. Even up north, you know, there is discrimination up here, and especially if they're coming from the south, they have to come all the way up. And numbers are very, very, very important to them for their safety. Okay, and this is the same tournament, but I did this because it showed that we have Bob Hawkins, who was first the president. He's now taken the job as vice president. And so they're changing just like you did today. You know, they voted new people in, but everyone's still there. Negro golfers to meet pros September 2nd, and this is 1928. And this is really very interesting. The match will be the first time in history of golf that local fans will have the opportunity to see two of New England's finest golfers match against two crack Negro players. And this was unheard of. And they were opening it up here in Stowe so that people could come and watch. And what is very interesting, I have this book in the back. This book is just wonderful. And he talked, Sinnott, talked about this one tournament, and the prize money was $300 was awarded. The top professional received $100. You have to remember the year, and we're also talking about African Americans. At the conclusion of the event, there's an elaborate program and dinner dance. And prizes were awarded for the longest drive. This is not a golf drive. This is the drive in your car. It's just like when you go to a reunion, high school or college, and someone gets a prize for coming the furthest or the closest, or they have all sorts of things. This is what this was talking about. The best dressed golfer. Now, I know you have to remember they dressed nicely. They had every single picture I've seen, not at Mapledale, but at other, at this era, they all were dressed nicely. So you had the best one, and the owner of the best-looking golf clubs. All right. And then in 1928, and this was the final tournament held at Mapledale, and what was interesting, this is the era when they spelled Stowe with the E. You see a lot of our town documents. All of a sudden, there's an E on it, and then it disappears. And Porter Washington, we had a pro here, and he was the top, he was the winner in this one. However, right after this, 1921, Hawkins was a disillusioned man. He spent $25,000 of his personal funds. Imagine this is 1920, the 20s. That's a monster amount of money. And he borrowed an additional $5,000 to keep the club alive. Mapledale Club at Stowe will no longer be a resort. He wrote part of this letter and sent it. It was sent down here, you can sort of see it, to the Pittsburgh Courier, saying, that's it, we can't do this. And so he gave it up, and this was the first mortgage. He had 2 big mortgages going. So this is the first one as it's collapsing. Then we have the Stowe paper getting involved in this, because we have the sale of the real estate. It was October 6th, selling at public auction for $5,000. Think about what he put into that. Think what he put into it. And it was advertised in the Stowe News Enterprise on the 12th, 19th, and 26th. This is what it was to sell this. And here, when you go to the registry and you're taking the pictures of all these, you see the number. This is the book number and the page number. And you go online and you just plug those in, and everything pops up for you. And you can research it. So what was for sale? 2 horses, 4 cows, and 2 calves. All poultry, crops, hay in the barn, wagons, and farm implements. All furnaces, heaters, ranges, mantles, gas and electric fixtures, screens, screen doors, awnings, all furniture, linen and furnishings, dishes, accepting and reserving 1 piano, 1 radio set, and all linen which belonged to my wife. However, any personal property lease which may be held by the Hopkins Furniture Company, you have to work with that. And last name was Oliver Briggs had the lease on the pool table. Then a little bit later, in the Boston Globe, page 8, there was a long column of all the people who were filing for bankruptcy. And that's why it's a little bit blurry, because it was so small. And it was, if I kept it that small, you wouldn't be able to read it. So it just shows that, he had to file for bankruptcy. He had nothing left. And so he's a laborer, so he's back just working, just trying to make a living. Here's the second mortgage. So what is interesting, a lot of these people, we have Celia Mayer, who bought the property, and she immediately sold it to Grace Sweeter. And it just went through all these things. It's crazy. And who sold it to Charles M. Cox. And then he is the one who developed Stowe Acres Country Club. And this is one of the glass plates right here. You saw that before. Here's another one. You can see Stowe. You can see the main building right here. And here's a building right here, which is obviously not there. You can see part of a car. That's part of the dance hall. And there's several pianos. Here's a little eating area. Here's outside. This is the corner. The corner's still there. Oops, sorry. This man right here is Cox. This might be his son right there. Don't know. And this is, you can see part of the building right here. So this is like a little putting green. And I'm sure it was totally staged. Maybe not. So I kept just putting this name in. And son of a gun, in 1941, another story popped up. And this is, they're now in Canton, Massachusetts, and it's the 16th annual Negro National Golf Tournament. The first 3 were in Stowe, and now they have 150 players coming from all over the United States. And it's a fun little article, but you don't need it. They couldn't play. It was raining so hard people couldn't see anything. And some of the players wanted to go out anyhow. And then, very seldom do we see a picture in the newspaper of black players, so they had the neat little picture, so I add that. They had this little teeny bottom court, and it said, Porter Washington, the local Negro pro who played in the first championship at Stowe in 1926. He was in the lead, and he was in the clubhouse with Walter Speedy of Chicago, and he had a big thing to do with Mapledale. And Walter Speedy said it was Bob Hawkins' idea. He kept writing me in Chicago about a tournament, and finally I agreed to bring some players to Mapledale for my club in Chicago. 7 came with me. There were 31 players at Mapledale in 1926. And then it goes on, there's contradictions about who named the organization in the United Golf Association and sponsoring, and there's still back and forth on that one. So this was a nice confirmation that we know what the players thought. So these stories are from Shady Rest and from Mapledale. As I mentioned, had noted that the cars were arriving in caravans. This happened in New Jersey, and the more I thought about it, it just made so much sense. Because in 1938, Victor Green published the first, the Negro Motorist Green Book, because the last name was Green. And it told them where to buy gas, where to stop to eat, where you could stay overnight. And it went across the country. It's just like when I was a kid, we had the AAA, the triptychs and all that. It guided us. This was their guide. And it was in use until the 60s, showing them how to navigate through the maze of the United States. So the Mapledale, from just the news articles, people were coming from New Jersey, New York, Chicago, Worcester. That's more the northern side. From deep south, you have Washington, D.C., Baltimore, places in North Carolina, New Orleans, Virginia, Georgia, and then that's the end, because that's where, later on, when it was at other places, it was across the country. And so these people needed assistance in getting, that's why they had the Green Book, which would have come in later on. These people did not have it, but afterwards they would. There's a wonderful, wonderful exhibit. This is the National Park Service using the Green Book. And we don't think about the discrimination up here, but it was very subtle. It was very, very subtle. I can't talk about Stowe. I grew up outside Detroit, and I know it was very, very subtle. We saw it all the time when we would go in, where the African Americans stood, where they sat, where they were on the bus, the whole thing. It was always, they were in their place. We have, Jonathan and I have already done one for Black History Week month. We did a video, and it's on YouTube. The Amateur Golf has another wonderful video about it. Freedom's Way has a very nice story about this. And then you have the Smithsonian Institute. And this is just, you got to preview this real fast. This is some of the sources. I'm sure I missed some. And it's not MLA. Everything else is all documented, but I just never got them in order. So that's it. We have an incredible treasure here in Stowe. The more I researched it, the more I said, oh my gosh, look what we have. When you take writings from professors from all over the country, and you look in the index and you see Stowe and Mapledale, they're talking about it. And Mapledale made a very big impact. So it's something to think about as, I know there's other groups who are thinking about it. The Conservation Commission is going to name the trail around outside the perimeters of the South Course. It's going to be the Mapledale Trail. There's plans, Bob McDonald is working on trying to get a granite and a sign for it. He has a plaque, it's copper, it's really nice. And it's all in research right now. So, and that is really nice. And there's a group of people who are also very interested. I think it's on the 17th of November. They're going to have a program at the library trying to get more people interested in this, and some of in the younger families, how can we teach these kids, how can we work with the families? And I had brought some books, but that's okay. for younger kids, there's some really cool literature, children's literature coming out now. And it's something that some people might even want to think about, write a Mapledale story. I'm not up to it right now. So, you've had a long afternoon, so I thank you for staying and listening. And Jonathan has this videotaped, so you can always watch it again. So.
Let's have a big hand for Meredith.